Please pray with me. May the words of my mouth and the meditations in each one of our hearts be acceptable to you, O Lord, for you are our rock, and you are our Redeemer. Amen. Greetings. As those of you who are regularly here at Peace already know, my spouse and I have 2 kids who are in elementary school. At some point in the last couple of years, I realized something about parenting. It's basically teaching kids how to be afraid and what to be afraid of. Fear the busy street. Fear the stranger. Fear the deep end of the pool. Fear an invisible virus. Lock the doors of your school. For grown-ups, I don't think that fear goes away. It just maybe becomes slightly less obvious, or maybe not. Fear changes in the stock market. Fear the colonoscopy. Worry about your wayward children, if they will turn out okay. Wonder if that glitch in your memory was normal or the start of something you are terribly afraid of. And that's in the best of circumstances. For those who live with the awareness that societal cards are stacked against them with injustices day after day, there is even more fear. Fear of unjust violence. The fear that any day a knock on the door or one wrong move can have permanent consequences. I could go on. Of everything that has happened in the last 3 years since our first pandemic Easter, I think one result is that we are marinated in fear. What are you afraid of? I overheard a conversation the other day between 2 young adult women. Strangers to me. I overheard them in Central Park in New York City, where I was watching our children play on the rocks. I heard just a minute of their conversation. They were talking about when they thought the end of the world was coming. One of them said she hoped it wouldn't come till she was old, but then that might not be good either, because she also hoped to have children and then she'd worry about them. The other thought that it would be better if it came soon, and it probably was. They were talking about the end of the world with a kind of casualness one would use if you were guessing what time pizza would be delivered. They weren't afraid. I think they were beyond fear. They were resigned. They were cynical. They were somewhere having given up. I don't know, I just heard a minute of their conversation. But I recognized the conversation. I recognized it in the dystopian movies and novels and video games that are so popular. I recognized it in the attitudes and the conversations I've had with many people, some not so young, about what was coming. There are plenty of reasons to be afraid. I don't need to keep going on with the litany of the things, right? The things that we can all name that make us wonder what in the world humans will cook up next to demonstrate just how powerful sin can be. A recent essay by the writer Rebecca Solnit was written to address the climate crisis. In this essay, she outlined many of the ways that our current society is pretty messed up. Intractable economic and political divisions, skyrocketing diagnoses of mental illness, lowered life expectancy, increased isolation, racism that keeps shape-shifting but never quite goes away, out-of-control gun use, and, of course, the trajectory toward an unlivable planet for many people and species. There, I did it again. The litany. She wrote something that surprised me so much that it stuck with me. She wrote this: "Much of the reluctance to do what climate change requires comes from the assumption that it means trading abundance for austerity," which is another word for a kind of impoverished life. Trading all our stuff and conveniences for less stuff, fewer conveniences. But what if it meant giving up things we're well rid of? Deadly emissions to nagging feelings of doom and complicity in destruction. What if the austerity, the poverty, is how we live now? And the abundance could be what's to come. What if? The gospel lesson we just heard from Matthew mentions fear quite a few times. It's a theme in the Gospel of Matthew. From the beginning of Jesus' earthly existence, when he was just a glimmer in his mama's eye, his father Joseph, wanting to do away with the whole thing, was visited by an angel and was told, "Do not be afraid." And then shortly after Jesus is born, Jesus' birth inspires a fear in Herod, who tries to kill him, and that fear accompanies Jesus' whole life. People who are afraid of what his message of love and forgiveness and peace and justice and mercy means for the things that they have become attached to. Fear related to healing, fear related to wholeness, fear working all different directions. Jesus teaches his disciples how not to be afraid. He doesn't just tell them, "Don't be afraid." He goes to the places of their fear, sits with them in it, and transforms it. He walks across water for them. He goes to the cross for them. There is fear all over Jesus' trial and crucifixion. The powers that were afraid of his movement, afraid of his truth-telling, afraid of his power, afraid of his love. And even after Jesus' crucifixion, those responsible for his death were still so afraid that his followers wouldn't stop. So they placed guards at the tomb and put a big rock in front of it and sealed it up, so that no one could get in. That's how fear works sometimes. We seal ourselves in with it. And we make ourselves as protected as we can be from anything that could disturb us, even if what could disturb us would be the very thing we need. We guard our lives so completely in security that we can forget that fear is not how we were meant to live. Fear is not how we are meant to live. What are you afraid of? What if you weren't? What if something else could happen, something that could surprise you, something that would change not only you, but the whole world was about to take place? That first Easter morning, the women went to the tomb. There are 4 different gospel accounts of this. In 2 of the other ones, it mentions the women going to the tomb in order to bring spices to anoint Jesus' body. But Matthew doesn't say why they went. He just says they go to see the tomb. And of course, that means all sorts of people have guessed as to why they went and why Matthew left out the detail. People have surmised that maybe they went not with spices because they knew there was no way they'd crack into that sealed space, not with the maximum security burial Jesus was given. Or maybe they went as emissaries of the male disciples for whom it was too dangerous to go, but maybe some women could sneak in there. And they went just to make sure there was no graffiti or whatever the first century equivalent of that would be. But then someone I read pointed out another reason that they went, a reason that not many people have come up with, but a reason that seems so basic that I like to think that it's right. Maybe they went to the tomb that morning because they believed him, because they had listened to him, and they heard him say over and over again, "I will be raised from the dead." I can imagine the conversation they had that morning, steeped in sorrow and fear, when the world, as they thought it could be, seemed to be over. And I can imagine one of them saying to the other, "Do you remember that time he told us about rising? What if that's true?" And I can picture the other one saying, "No way. That's definitely not true. That's not how the world works." And the other one saying, but what if? What if? Do you want to go? No, I don't want to go. The tomb is sealed. There's no way we could do anything productive if we got there. We'd only get ourselves in trouble. But what if? But what if? What if all this stuff that God says, that our faith teaches, that our songs proclaim, what if it is true? How would we live then? How would you live then? What tombs would you go to, trusting that God could make something new out of something dead? What relationships would you turn back to see if there isn't forgiveness or the possibility of a shift? What courage would you find to make a change? What cause would you join, saying, "I'm going to stop shaking my head about all this nonsense and join some other people and believe God that something else can come"? What fear would you confess to your community, trusting that some fears can't just be gotten over, they need to be loved through, trusting that there's a community called the church that can care for you in and through your fears? What risks would you take in the service of love? What if? The women went to the tomb. And then when they left the tomb, it's not like their fear was totally gone. They were going into very dangerous territory. But something came with them. They left with fear and with joy. They didn't know when they left the tomb that they would find Jesus along the way, but that's exactly what happened, because that's what the angel told them would happen. And they had the courage to trust the what if. And then they went and told the disciples, and so on and so forth, and here we are too. The angel told the women not to be afraid, but he did more than that. The angel met the women at their place of deepest fear and took away the very reasons they had to be afraid. The guards that could have arrested the women, they became like dead people, unable to move, with no power. Ultimately, it is God who cracks the tombs of our fears, who paralyzes the guards and rolls away the stones that keep us from claiming the future that God has promised us. And God doesn't just roll away the stone. God sits an angel down on the stone and says, "Is that all you can do?" I wish I could go back and find those two women. Women who are beloved by God, whether or not they know it. Women who should be excited about what their lives can be, what could happen next. I would tell them the same thing I'll tell you. That is that God is alive. The stone has been rolled away. The tomb is empty, and the world isn't ending. It's beginning. Amen.